Okay, folks. So this is a screencast. We're going to do these a couple of times. I'm doing this right now just to get through it so we don't have to waste class time on it. But sometimes we'll flip the class where you'll do the lecture at home watching it, and then we'll do some sort of activity in class. So this is the first time we're giving it a go. See how it goes. We're going to be talking about early civilizations, basically what the Neolithic Revolution, what we talked about in class today, what the Neolithic Revolution is going to actually lead to, these first civilizations. So, how do I want you to take notes on this? Same way. These are going to be the same notes that we're going to have all year long. When I check your notes tomorrow in class, they should look like this in order to get credit. Once again, the area up top here, the title and the objective should be in red. The main ideas for each area should be in blue. Your notes here should be in black. And your summary should be in red when we're done. Okay? So, quick refresh from yesterday. What was so important about the Neolithic Revolution was the creation of agriculture, right? The innovation of agriculture. What's important about this agriculture is it's going to lead to a surplus, which just means extra. For the first time ever, they're going to have extra food. They're not going to be constantly moving for food as hunters and gatherers did. With that extra food, it gives time. It gives them time to focus on other things. We don't have to focus on food anymore. So the first job, other than an agriculturalist, is going to be a potter to make big pots to hold the agriculture. Then we're going to have people who work with metal. We're going to have artists. We're going to have people who work with wood. Okay, that's all specialized labor, different jobs. And with these different jobs, because agriculture makes people settled, they don't constantly have to move around, they can amass stuff. And with that stuff, they're going to begin to trade. This is important because it's going to lead to the first time that we see social classes, the rich and the poor, right? This is going to lead to complex societies, which we're talking about today. And with these complex societies, the interaction between them is cultural diffusion. If I had to break down AP World History into one term, it would be cultural diffusion. Okay? So, Neolithic Revolution causes civilizations to pop up around the world. Where do you think these civilizations are going to pop up? If you have to think about it, just think about it for a second. Hopefully, you're thinking agriculture. What do you need for agriculture? Well, you need soil, you need sunshine, and you need water. Okay? So all of these early civilizations, they're known as early river valley civilizations, right? We see Mesopotamia being the first, in between the Tigris and the Euphrates. Okay? We have Egypt with the Nile. We have the Indus Valley with the Indus River. And we have China with the Huanghe, also known as the Yellow River. Okay, so water is life. It allows for agriculture, which allows for surplus, which allows for time, which allows for all these things that allow civilizations to exist. So all of these early civilizations are all going to be near rivers, because rivers equals life. Okay? So the objective today is to know the different locations and aspects of each early complex society. So we're talking about Mesopotamia, we're talking about Egypt, Indus Valley, and the Shang in China. And once again, this is how we're breaking down all of the empires that we covered this year. Spice T plus. S, social aspects. P, political aspects. I, interaction with the environment. C, cultural, namely religion. E, economics. T, technology. And plus, important marker events. These are the key terms you need to be familiar with. You might see them on the quiz tomorrow. So you can pause that and check that out. Once again, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Indus, early China. So here we go. Mesopotamia. It's the first complex society that we see. And how do we know this? Carbon dating. So by carbon dating the pots and the ceramics used, historians think this is the oldest complex civilization that existed. Okay? Mesopotamia literally means it's Greek for land between rivers. Okay? Located between the Tigris and the Euphrates. This is important. Tigris and Euphrates were known for unpredictable violent flooding. Okay, this is extremely important to understand because who do you think the Mesopotamians thought controlled the river and the flooding. They thought it was the gods. Okay? Water is life. It leads to life for people, life for agriculture. They thought this came from the gods. If the rivers are unpredictable and violent in their flooding, how do you think they're going to view their gods? Unpredictable and violent as well. And this is extremely important in understanding early religions. Early religions are based upon environment, what you're exposed to, the food that you're exposed to, the climate. And people would ascribe these ideas to their gods. It's very important that you see this because when we look at Egypt, the Nile River flooded very predictably. It was stable. It was slow. So they viewed their gods as stable, fair, benevolent. Okay? It's a very important compare and contrast right there. Mesopotamia's flooding was unpredictable. They thought the gods controlled it, therefore they thought their gods were unpredictable and violent, whereas the Egyptians had a very stable, slow flooding, and they ascribed those ideas to their gods. Okay, the Sumerians are the cultural group that you want to be familiar with. They were skilled builders. Cuneiform is believed to be the first written language that was created by the Sumerians. It was first created for business, basically almost like a receipt. I sold this to you for this, and it would be hammered out on a clay tablet. That is the first written language, and the purpose of it was basically like a receipt for a business transaction. They also built ziggurats. Ziggurats are Mesopotamian pyramids to show the glories of their civilizations and to show worship to their gods. And we see that throughout history. There's one commonality that we see. Civilizations and empires will build large buildings in order to show they're great. Look how great we are that we can build this, right? And we see that today. We see that in the skyscrapers in New York City. Who wants to, build the tallest building in the world? The Eiffel Tower in France. Certainly the pyramids in ancient Egypt, right? Monumental architecture shows that your society is advanced. Okay. Um, they also have the world's oldest literary epic, the Gilgamesh epic, Epic of Gilgamesh. What's important about this is a pattern that we're going to see throughout the year. I want you to focus on the pattern is using religion to legitimize political power. So what he has this story written and he has it disseminated throughout the empire, and the story is that he is part God. And the story is him, fighting all these gods to achieve immortality. Very similar to the Odyssey. Um, but the point of it is it's showing the leader to be part God. Now, why do you want that if you're a leader? Of course, it garners respect and it garners fear. And we see that throughout history, where leaders are either all God, part God, connected to the God or gods chose them. And this is a pattern that I want us to be thinking about. Religion being used to legitimize political power. And we see this globally throughout history. Another thing to think about is within this story, there's a story of a flooding very similar to Noah and the Ark, which connects this idea of cultural diffusion. Perhaps elements of this story help the writers of Noah and the Ark, cultural diffusion. The origin of government. So the first government in the history of the world. Why did it happen? Well, here are the main arguments. Historians think it has to do with cooperation dealing with flooding. Flooding was a very large overtaking involving hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. And flooding was so important because it allowed for that water to be stored in order to grow crops. Crops mean life, right? You have to have food to keep the empire going. So they think that the initial governments had to do with organizing these large groups to deal with flooding. Okay, when we talk about politics, know that they had city-states, therefore they're decentralized. Okay, they were decentralized. Okay. Social structure, the rulers and the elite classes controlled the land, farmed by slaves. This is something else you need to be familiar with for this class. Throughout history, slaves are the backbone of civilization. Slaves, peasants, serfs, they produce the food that allows for the surplus, that allows for the time. Throughout history, they're going to be the backbone of societies. Okay. Furthermore, a new word, patriarchal, we need to be familiar with, right? Patriarchal is male-dominated society. Okay. And what we see here is extremely patriarchal society. Men had the power to sell their wives if they owed money to someone without the wives having a say, without the women having a say. Women began to be forced to wear veils to cover their face and their body. The argument for that being was if it wasn't covered, men would not be able to control themselves. So the argument that they used was that it was to protect women, which, I mean, I think you can make a valid argument that that's more of a critique on men than women, but women were forced to be veiled. Okay, now there are some examples of women getting jobs as scribes or businesswomen or priestesses in religion, but all of these were women who were born into upper class families, either had an extremely wealthy husband or extremely wealthy father. By and large, they're extremely patriarchal. So whenever you hear the word patriarchal, what you want to look for is evidence showing that men are trying to make women dependent on them by either stripping their rights, not allowing them to get divorced, being able to sell them, as in Mesopotamia. But it's definitely a continuity, patriarchy that you want to think about throughout society. Okay, all about location. Another problem with Mesopotamia is that there are no natural borders. Therefore, it's easily invaded. A place that's easily invaded, it's hard to develop a strong culture. The Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, I mean, Mesopotamia is constantly being invaded. So just keep that in mind. If you're constantly being invaded, how do you view your world, right? This goes along with that violent and unpredictable flooding. Mesopotamia had a very negative, very violent view of the world around them, okay? Code of Hammurabi is going to be the first legal system written down. It's extremely important, okay? Why is this so important? Well, we're shifting from each day a judge or a king could give different penalties, right? Depending on their mood, depending on how they felt that day. One day someone might be punished, one day, the next day, someone might be set free. So the whole importance of this Code of Hammurabi is we have a organized, systematic rule where if you commit this crime, there is this penalty, right? But it wasn't fair. So I want you to think of the Hammurabi's Code as eye for an eye unless you're rich. Because what we see is the punishments are very different. If a slave commits a crime, it was usually mutilation. So if you stole something, your hands were taken, were cut off, right? If you killed someone, you were killed. If you killed someone's child, your child was killed. Okay? Different penalties for the rich. Usually the rich would be able to pay. So if they committed a crime, they could pay money to satisfy the crime. And by and large, from historical accounts, the people who are poor would rather have the money than the actual punishment. The easiest way to think about the Hammurabi's Code is one, eye for an eye unless you're rich, and two, what's important about it is it's a systematic way of you committed this crime, here's what happens to you. And if we're going to be real, the legal system, hasn't changed that much. Of course, we see that people who are wealthy, what can they do? Hire very good attorneys, and they're less likely to get in trouble and get the penalties as someone who is poor, who is arrested for a crime. Okay, just a thought. Moving on. This is the recap. Just read through it real quick if you want to. And we head to Egypt. Hopefully, you realize this is the Nile. And what's important about this picture is you can see it's just desert all around. And what we see here is how everywhere the Nile goes, it's just teeming with life. Once again, river meant life. It meant civilization. Okay? So, nestled on the banks of the Nile, once again, it's all about location. Why is location important? Water allows for agriculture, which allows for surplus, which allows for time, which allows for specialized labor, which allows for trade. Okay? What's important about Egypt? Unlike Mesopotamia, they're not decentralized, they're highly centralized under their leader, Pharaoh. Okay? Highly centralized. And they're a theocracy. Once again, we're talking about religion being used to legitimize political power. What we see here is Pharaoh, who is this all-controlling leader in the centralized government, claims to be the son of the sun god, Ra. Okay? So once again, look at that big you know, light in the sky that the plants lean towards, guess what? I, as Pharaoh, I came from that. That's my father. I'm the son of Ra. Why? To legitimize political power. Okay? What else? They're polytheistic, many gods and goddesses, strong belief in life after death, which is why we have mummification. They wanted to preserve their bodies. So in the afterlife, that their bodies would be preserved. They invented the first paper, papyrus, which is extremely important. We're shifting from cuneiform on clay tablets to papyrus. Why is that important? Hopefully you're thinking ease. It's a lot lighter. It can be moved. It can be transported much easier than clay tablets. They were extremely advanced in math, medicine, and astronomy. They came up with a 365-day calendar, which is pretty impressive. We have evidence that they traded with Mesopotamia. Historians think that hieroglyphics are based off of cuneiform. But once again, this is an example of cultural diffusion, right? Which basically point of the class. Stable and predictable flooding equals stable and predictable gods. And unlike Mesopotamia, they have deserts surrounding them, so it's very difficult to conquer Egypt. Why is that important? They're going to have a strong, stable culture. For close to 2,000 years, they're not going to be invaded by external threats. Strong culture. Okay? Social classes, slavery is common. They are patriarchal, but they're less patriarchal than any other river valley civilization. Okay? Women could own property. Women could propose marriage. Women could demand a divorce. Okay? This illustrates, although they were patriarchal in many ways, that women did have certain rights in in Egypt. Okay, so they're the least patriarchal. It's important to know that. Next to the Indus River Valley, this is the Indus Valley civilization. Indus, we see Indus, so we're guessing where is this? Indus, India. Okay, Indus is the root word for both India and Hindu. Okay, they all come from this Indus root word. Okay, now Indus River Valley, where is it located? It was located in this area right here between Pakistan and India. Okay, problem is we do not know a lot about them. It was huge. It was the largest. We don't know a lot about them. They do have a written language. Problem is no one has been able to decipher it. There's not been a Rosetta Stone found to decipher this. So we have all of this information, but no one knows how to decipher it. Maybe one of you guys will be able to decipher it in the future. Anyway, we can't decipher the written language, but what we do know about them is that they were great builders. They constructed large cities that were designed almost identically. A good example of that is Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Why is that important? If you have two cities 90 miles away from each other and they're almost identical, this suggests they were centralized. This suggests centralized leadership. Okay? They're probably highly unified, probably politically centralized. Okay? These are the two cities that I was talking about, Mohenjo-daro, Harappa. They were almost identical in construction. They were so advanced, all types of cool stuff. They would, let's see, they cut little holes in all of their houses, and these holes, when the wind would blow, it would create like a natural air conditioning. They had extremely advanced plumbing that worked on an angle. Um, and then the Aryans, which we'll talk about when we talk about religion, the Aryans are a group that are going to come in and conquer India and bring with them Hinduism, but we're not there yet. They have a polytheistic religion, which is going to later influence Hinduism, planned cities, and advanced technologies. Once again, sorry, going back, we don't know what happened to them. We don't know why they disappeared. Let's get through this. Next, early China and the Yellow River. You can see this river here. It has this sort of yellowish hue. That's why it's known as the Yellow River. Once again, society is going to be built around river for agricultural purposes. The two dynasties you want to focus on are the Shang and the Zhou. Okay, now the Shang is the first. There are no written records. They did not have a written language. Okay, so Mesopotamia had a written language. Egypt had a written language. Indus River Valley had a written language. The Shang did not. Okay, what they did have was oracle bones. Oracle bones is like a precursor. Basically, they were little symbols that they would put on the bones of animals, heat them up, and then tell them your fortune, tell you what your future held. Okay, and this is going to later lead to writing, but it's not considered writing now. Okay, what you want to know is that the Shang followed ancestor worship. which is extremely important. It's going to be a continuity throughout Chinese history. Basically, you would honor your dead relatives. And if you honored your dead relatives would help affect your life in a good way. By offerings, by worshiping, by praying to dead relatives, things would go good for you. Ancestor worship, okay? Now, what you definitely need to know is this idea of the mandate of heaven, okay? The mandate of heaven. This happens after the Shang. So after the Shang, we have a different empire called the Zhou. And the Zhou create this mandate of heaven. The idea behind the mandate of heaven is as long as a leader governs wisely and fairly, they can continue to rule. And who decides if they rule? Ancestors. So if you are an emperor, your ancestors would be what? Past emperors. Okay? So they're the ones who are deciding whether or not you get to rule. Now, how does this, illustrate itself? Bad things happen. If we start having floods, if we have a plague, if we have a famine, if there is a peasant revolt, this is all evidence that the past emperors are unhappy with your performance and they are taking away your mandate of heaven. They're taking away your right to rule. Okay? The Zhou created the mandate of heaven in order to take over the Shang. They said all of these bad things are happening. Obviously, the ancestors are unhappy and they took it away. What's important about this mandate of heaven is this is going to exist throughout Chinese dynasties. Such an important idea. No, mandate of heaven, without a doubt. Okay, and China, family is the center of society. When we talk about society, the whole empire is supposed to be viewed as one large family, with the emperor being the father to all. Okay, women were subordinate. What do we call this? Hopefully, you're thinking patriarchy. Ancestor worship. Believe spirits of family ancestors could bring good fortune or disaster. Okay? That is the basis of Chinese religion. Ancestor worship. Okay? And then this is an example of those oracle bones that I was telling you about. Remember, they're not a written language. Here's the dynastic cycle, mandate of heaven. Make sure you're familiar with it. Rulers are chose to rule by heaven. Past emperors, ancestors, and will continue to rule as long as heaven is pleased. If heaven is not pleased, they will pass the mandate to another family. So here we go. We have a new dynasty put in. They restore peace. After several generations, the new dynasty becomes an aging dynasty, and perhaps the aging dynasty neglects government duties, or becomes corrupt, or starts losing parts of the provinces, or starts increasing taxes. Then what happens is perhaps floods, famine, earthquakes, invasions. All of these things are proof that the leadership is losing their mandate of heaven. So what would happen is another group would take over and say, obviously, this family has lost the mandate of heaven. Look at all this bad stuff that's happened. We should be able to take over. Okay? Here's the summary. As agricultural for all of these early River Valley civilizations, as agricultural villages evolved into cities, some urban areas began to display the characteristics of civilization. There's the order. What I want you to do is do a quick little summary of Mesopotamia, Egypt, Indus River, and Shang and Zhou, and think of spice tea plus categories. Okay? And that's it, folks.